give it up as he makes his way to the stage.
Well, we sure love you guys, and man, what an honor and joy it is to pastor this church. And it's not an easy task, but it is one that Laura and I consider a deep privilege, and y'all are just some wonderful people to pastor. So thank you for being awesome, and give yourselves a round of applause. How about that? Love you guys, seriously. Thanks for being here on a little rainy, kind of ugly noon kickoff Sunday. Thank you for making this a priority in your week. All our church family online, thank you for tuning in and being a part of this. Before we dive in today, I want to remind everyone that we are now 3 weeks away from our kingdom offering. This is our one time a year where we ask everyone that considers themselves a part of Church of the Four Corners to give over and above their tithe to meet kingdom projects. What you see on the screen on the side of me and behind me is our kingdom catalog. 100% of this offering, November 14th, will go towards meeting the needs in this book. We set a goal last year for $50,000, and you guys, in just a week period, blew that away. And so we've set a very audacious faith goal, and we're still just believing by faith that God's going to show up and do incredible things. And we have all kinds of needs, from future Christian leaders and church plants to local needs, even global ones. And so I want to just share one of those needs with you that we would love to meet, God willing. And it's from a couple that was in our church, and while they were here, God called them into the mission field. It's a couple by the name of JT and Anna Farr. Normal people, right? JT's just this guy that you'd see on the street, tattooed arms. Anna, just a wonderful person, a couple kids, and they were living their suburban life. Life was normal, and then God just said, hey, I want you to sell everything you own and go into the mission field, and they said yes. And that's what we're going to talk about today, the power of simply saying yes. And so we're trying through our kingdom offering to raise money so that they can cover airfare and traveling expenses, so that they might use their specific skills to fight sex trafficking in the country of Cambodia. That's amazing. That's something that all of us can get behind. To think that there's a child in the country of Cambodia that may never be trafficked because of a couple living in Blue Springs, Missouri that had the courage to say yes. That's what this is all about. And so I want to encourage you to just simply pray and ask God how he would respond, and ask you to give. And ask him for that number, and when you get it, you don't have to give any more than that, but we ask that you wouldn't give any less. And even especially for those of you attending online in this season, this is an amazing opportunity for you guys to be a part of the life of our church, even though you are worshiping at a distance. And here's the coolest thing about the church and the kingdom, is that when everyone does their part, all of the needs are met and God gets all of the glory. Amen? So that's what we're going to do. So be praying now. It's going to be an amazing, amazing day. Let's dive in. We are in week number 12, that's hard to believe, of our series, Guards Against Humanity. And today's going to be a lot of fun, because today we get to look at what might possibly be the greatest miracle of Jesus outside of the resurrection, right? Because that one always wins. That's kind of a big deal. That's kind of the only reason we're here, is the resurrection, the foundation of our faith. But outside of that, today's miracle is probably the most popular. In fact, it's the only miracle that's listed in all 4 of the Gospels. Because today I want to look at the story of when Jesus feeds the 5,000. And what happens when you read this story, not through the Gospel of John, but through the Gospel of Mark, what you discover is that it wasn't, in fact, 5,000 people who were fed, but only 5,000 men. Most scholars agree that there was anywhere from approximately 15 to 20,000 people that would have been directly impacted from this singular ministry. To just give you perspective, that is every single seat full at capacity in the T-Mobile Center. T-Swift ain't got nothing on that. It's awesome. So that's what we're going to look at today. And we're going to have some fun as we retell this gospel classic. And my prayer is that as we get to the end of our time together this morning, that what we're going to discover is that maybe this story wasn't about what we thought this story was about. As we often find as we read through these stories of the Bible, that we understand what's happening at a surface level, but maybe there's this transcendent lesson. Maybe there's a deeper truth that Jesus is wanting to kind of lift up our head and to show us something about ourselves, to show us something about his will and what it means to live a life of purpose and impact. So you guys ready to go? All right, let's dive in. John chapter 6, starting in verse number 1. John writes, sometime after, would you say that word with me? This. Sometime after this. This John is referring to is John chapter 5. We camped out here about 5 weeks where Jesus heals a paralytic man at Bethesda. He does so on the Sabbath, breaking the Jewish law. Jesus is therefore criticized, and in response to this criticism, preaches what might be one of the greatest sermons ever. So here's Jesus, he's preaching his guts out, he's healing people, doing his thing, and my man is exhausted. So this is what Jesus does. We're told that he crossed to the far shore of the Sea of Galilee. That is the Sea of Tiberias. So that would have been approximately a 45-minute boat ride from where he was. Verse 2, and a what crowd? A great crowd. To which you might be thinking, well, Craig, what constitutes a great crowd? Well, think of the number of people that were involved in the miracle. 15 to 20,000 people. Imagine that Garth Brooks has just got done playing his 27th consecutive show. They open up the doors and a sold-out crowd flocks to one grassy area. That is the amount of people we're talking about. A great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Said another way, my boy Jesus has just blown up. Like he has gone mainstream. So to help us kind of understand fully what's happening, think of it this way. So pretend with me for a moment that you are in a band. We like this. This is a fun scenario. Everyone wants to be a rock star at some point in your life. So you're in a band, and real band life, and I can test as someone who lived real band life, is by no means what you glamorize band life as. You think of playing main stages, thousands of people. Real band life is living in a van with a bunch of sweaty, smelly dudes. That's what it's like. And imagine you're living this life, and you've been grinding it out for a decade. Releasing albums and trying to build up a following, and you're just going from one venue to the next, barely making ends meet, one podunk town to the next, and then finally it happens. You write the song. It's the song that is so radio friendly, and it's the song that will define your career. And now you have all of these record executives and labels that wouldn't give you the time of day. They're beating down your door to just give you money and to sign you. Think of it this way. Pretend you're a social influencer, and for you've been producing content and writing great copy for years, and it's just trickling along. One follow here, one follow there, a few here, and then it happens, and you finally write the blog post, or you take the picture, or you do the TikTok dance, or whatever that is, and you go to sleep, and you go to sleep with 2,000 followers, and you wake up with 200,000 followers, and celebrities are resharing your content, and it's the genesis moment of your success. You can trace it back to this moment before everything took off. This is exactly what's happening with Jesus. He spent 30 years of his life in total obscurity communing with the Father. He begins his public ministry, and people are healed, and he's teaching, and a handful are intrigued that they're beginning to notice. But then it happens. He heals a man paralyzed 38 years at Bethesda, and the crowds lose their minds. That Jesus is now no longer this kind of obscure rebel rabbi, that he is the teacher that the crowds will come in mass to follow. And how does Jesus respond to this newly found popularity? Because growth experts would tell you, well, you got to strike while the iron's hot. You know, you finally get this momentum, and it's so hard to get momentum, so when you got it, you ride it as hard and as long as you can. And it's just grow, expand, build, sell. But how does Jesus respond? We're told the answer in verse number 3. It says, "Then Jesus went up on a mountainside and sat down with his disciples." That Jesus goes and hides in a mountain. That Jesus, the moment he achieves the status of celebrity, runs away and seeks refuge. And I love this because it's one of the very few examples in the Bible where we see Jesus as just a normal guy. That he's just hanging out, chilling with his disciples, watching football, playing cards. And I love this because he's tired and he understands, even as the Son of God, his own physical limitations. He understands that his soul needs to recharge. They did a study recently, and I can attest to this, that they found even preaching a sermon is equivalent to about an 8-hour workday, one message. Because when you're up here, your brain's like, and like emotionally, physically, everything is firing, and you walk off the stage and you're like, nap, please. Like, I'm done. And so Jesus, he's famished, he's exhausted, and so he's retreating away, allowing his soul to recover. We're going to do a series in January all about this. What does it look like to fight for our souls, fight for our health? And 1 week, we're going to take an entire week and dedicate it to learning the biblical discipline of Sabbath. Specifically, what we'll do is we're going to compare the difference between a Sabbath and a day off, or what one theologian called a bastard Sabbath. Because a lot of us, we have days off. We're not working 7 days a week typically, but yet we're still exhausted, overstretched, worn out, overscheduled, overmedicated, overextended, and we wonder why we're so broken. We've learned the discipline, we've lost the discipline of Sabbath rest. And Jesus, he realizes that he has the choice to break this cycle. And so here we are, Jesus given the chance to capitalize on his newfound popularity, which one might think at face value would be a good idea because he has a rather important message, yes? It's like, oh, cool. Like, what you're saying is very important. The crowds are here. Let's take advantage of this. But yet, very counterintuitively, he retreats to the mountains. It says this in verse 4. The Jewish Passover festival was near. And I think that this verse is here to tell us and explain why there were so many people around. Because the Passover for the Jews, it was the main event. It was the Super Bowl. Everyone came together. Verse 5, that when Jesus looked up and he saw a great crowd, 15 to 20,000 people coming towards him, he said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? So a couple things. First off, if you're tired, exhausted, worn out, what's the last thing in the world you want to see when you look up? I don't know, 20,000 people who need something from you? Like, this is a worst case scenario in my mind. Yet, how does Jesus respond? Does he throw his hands up in the air and be like, oh, this is just great, guys. This was supposed to be me time, and now it's you time. You're the worst. What does he say here? No. The very first words out of his mouth are, hey, how will we feed the crowds of people coming? The first thing he thinks of is not himself, but rather the crowd. He shows compassion for the people. It's just so evident Jesus' love for humankind. And secondly, this is interesting. Of all of the disciples, who does Jesus ask where they should buy food? He asks Philip. So you may not know this. Philip is from a town called Bethsaida, which was right next to where the disciples were. And so what's happening at the most basic level is Jesus is like, hey, you're the local guy. Where do we get food? And we get this. We all do this. I've got a buddy who lives in Nashville. His name's Jamie. When I'm in Nashville, I don't pull up Yelp on my phone to find where I'm going to eat. I'm calling Jamie. Like, dude, where's the good food? Where's the coffee? Where's the Nashville hot chicken place that if the health department knew what was really going on there, it would have been shut down years ago? I want to go there. I don't care if it costs me later. I want to go there. So the local guy, you understand what's going on. This is what's happening at the surface. But once again, there's something beneath the surface that Jesus is always doing. And we can see this in verse number 6. He writes, he asked this to Philip only to, what's the word there? Test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Would you appreciate this moment with me? It doesn't matter what Philip says, in the sense that Jesus is going to do what he's going to do, and he already knows how he's going to do it. But yet Jesus invites Philip into the process. He invites Philip into his absolute will. And here's why this matters. For some of us, we live with such guilt, and we live with such shame because we believe that because we made mistakes, because of the sins of our past, we have somehow ruined the will of God. And can I just say something that's going to really help you this morning? Don't give yourself that much credit. For real. Because you're only you. And me, I'm only me. But he's God. So he's going to get his. His will is going to be accomplished. He knows what it is, and he knows how it's going to happen. Yet very graciously, very mercifully, he invites us to participate in his will. We'll talk more about that here in a moment. This is what Paul calls being a co-laborer with Christ. That we're invited to participate. And it's interesting, what is the reason why Jesus asks Philip the question? What does it say? He was going to test him. This is a test. Sometimes we think like, oh, well, Jesus would never test us. No, he would. Even right here, he's testing Philip. It's showing that Jesus allows testing to take place in our life. Jesus does not need Philip's help to feed 20,000 people. He invites him into this experience for one reason, so that Philip might be changed. He doesn't do it because he's angry with Philip. He doesn't do it because Philip accidentally stepped on his robe earlier, and this is his passive-aggressive move to get back at him. He doesn't do it because he's vindictive. He does it because he loves Philip and wants him to change. This is why he tests us, because of his love, and he longs to see us grow. And the unfortunate reality of human nature is that we only grow through testing. See, Philip would have been impressed by the miracle, by the feeding of the multitude as a spectator. He'd have been like, oh, wow, this is awesome. Go, Jesus, I'm with him. This is cool. But yet he would have been transformed as a participant. And this is what Jesus is doing. And it provides us a new filter through which how we see the testing in our own lives. That the testing is there for a reason. It's difficult by design. It's intentional because Jesus is longing to transform us more into his image. And I love Philip's answer to the question, because his answer is what I often do when Jesus asks me a question. He's like, well, how are we going to feed all these people? It would take more than a half year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. Wah, wah. When you're enjoying your day and things are going your way, and then along comes Debbie Downer. Wah. Like, this is what we do with God. It's like a bad SNL skit played over time and time again. God, he's asking us questions in our life. Hey, why aren't you giving me money? Like, why aren't you surrendering this part of your life? Hey, when are you going to go start that nonprofit that I laid on your heart? When are you going to go adopt that kid? When are you going to go let go of fear and begin to serve? When are you going to share your faith with your boss? When are you going to do this and that? And our knee-jerk reaction is like, oh, well, we're going to do that. Well, I can't do that because wah, wah. And Jesus to Philip, he's like, bro, you misunderstand the question. Like, I'm not asking you like if we're going to do it. I'm asking you how. I'm not asking your permission or whether you think this is possible. I'm inviting you into the solution of how it's going to take place. And oftentimes, I think we forget, and this is a message we have seen over and over in John, that the outcome is not on us, guys. Isn't that such good news? The outcome of your service, the outcome of your obedience, the outcome of your faithfulness is not your responsibility. For example, I'm going to preach, and then maybe someone's going to get saved at the end of this message. That's not me. I talk, and then I point them to someone who saves. I talk, God saves. My job is to talk, God saves people. This is the cycle. We're just called to be faithful. I was talking to someone this week, and she said, She finally got an opportunity to share her faith with this guy that she'd been praying for months. And she was like, Craig, I totally blew it. He asked me, well, what do you believe? It was like this crazy 1 in a million opportunity. And I was like, and I just like stumbled over my words. And I couldn't put two, intelligent thoughts together. And I walked away so discouraged. And then like 3 or 4 days later, my hairdresser asked me the exact same question, and I led her to the Lord in that chair. Like that's, we just are called to open up our mouth, and sometimes it's gonna be a dumpster fire. And sometimes God's gonna say, this is the moment. Sometimes it'll be articulate, and sometimes it'll be sloppy. The outcome isn't on us. I think God is looking for a generation of Christians who will simply be willing to say yes. Can we say yes? Can I show up? You know what takes no talent? Showing up. Being available. Working hard. Being resilient when your friends quit. Staying faithful when your group quits. Pressing on. This is what God is asking of us. And he's saying, leave the life change. Leave the unseen. Leave the supernatural to me. Because the moment you try to manufacture that, it's going to be a nightmare. It's not on us. And so in verse 8, Jesus, he's going to give us just another clue, another insight into God's sovereign will. Verse 8, it says this, another of his disciples, so Philip's like kind of blowing it. Jesus is like, hey, Philip, how do we do this? And right, we can do that because he's super analytical. He approaches it from a logistical perspective. He's got no faith. But then another one of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Well, hey, what about this kid? I got a boy here with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish, but how far will they go among so many? Said another way, hey, listen, I don't know how this even comes close to feeding the multitude, but this is what I have. Like, I don't see how it's humanly possible that this will meet the need, but this is everything that I've got. And I love that. First off, I love Andrew because he's someone who's always bringing people to Jesus. Did you know it was Andrew who brings his brother Peter to Jesus? You would assume because Peter's the rock star that it was vice versa, but it's not. For all we know, the only reason why Peter ever met Jesus was because of Andrew. Yes, the same Peter who became the leader of the New Testament church, the same Peter who preached at Pentecost and thousands were saved because of Andrew. He's the unsung hero of the story. He's like the farmer who tells a young Billy Graham, hey kid, come to the revival service, I'll let you drive my truck. And then he shows up, and because of that moment, tens of millions of people will be saved. We don't know the farmer's name, but none of that happens. He was used by God. This is Andrew. He's bringing people to Jesus. And he goes out and he finds some random kid. Don't miss the point of what Jesus is showing us through the text. So we see that, and we've already established that God's will is going to be done, right? Philip blows it. But what happens? Because Philip failed to live by faith, because Philip wasn't who he needed to be, was the need unmet? No. God just goes, boop, I'm going to use Andrew. Because once again, I'm going to do the miracle, and I even know how I'm going to do it. The question is, through whom? This is how God's will works, guys. that he's going to do his will. And when one person refuses, he will use someone else until he finds someone who's willing to say yes. The question is not whether God's will is going to happen. The question is whether or not you and I will be used in the process. Will you say yes to God and see him work miraculous, unexplainable, generational work through you? Or will you see him move on and work through someone else? And how is it that God moves? How is it that God so oftentimes chooses to accomplish his will? Well, we're given to the answer to that question in verse number 9. Look at it again with me. It said, here is who? It's a boy. It's not a man. What's the boy's name? No one cared. See, in our day and age, we celebrate children. Oftentimes, our lives revolve around our kids, and we protect our kids more so than we would even adults. And this is something we've gotten right as a society. But it wasn't like this back in these times. Kids were viewed as a nuisance. They were a burden on society until they could produce. So this kid is socially, his value is he's socially worthless. And he doesn't even have a name. He's that insignificant. But yet Jesus decides to use a boy with 5 small, what? Barley loaves. So this week we had to call upon our resident expert baker, Courtney Kelly. Shout out to Courtney for a loaf. And barley was what poor people would eat. In this day and age, barley was actually more commonly fed to animals than it would be to human beings. Barley was worth about 1/3 that of wheat. And so the only reason anyone would eat barley bread is because you were immensely poor. It's poor people food. So God uses a boy with barley bread, and it says 2 fish, 2 small fish. The Greek word for fish is ichthus, but that's not the word used here in this text. Because ichthus would communicate a substantial sized fish. That's probably what we've seen in a lot of our, cheesy Christian reproduction movies of this. And they're holding up this like big trout and it looks awesome and delicious. That wasn't what's happening. The fish that they're talking about would have been a small pickled fish, more what we would know as a sardine. So you want to know how the will of God is accomplished through the earth? Through a nameless, socially worthless boy. Poor person bread and a handful of sardines. This is how God works. It says to us in 1 Corinthians 1, Paul says that God will use the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. He says that God will use the weak, the under-resourced, the overlooked, the unlikely to shame the strong. This is how God works. And the reason why this is so immensely important is chances are many of us at some point in our lives, we've believed the lie that God could never use anyone like me. Surely he couldn't use me. So I'm just going to keep my head down, encourage others, try to be the best person I can. But the thought of God using us, because we know how broken we are. we know the rap sheet of regrets and failures. We know God could never use me because of the divorce, or because of the people that I've hurt, or the time that I stepped out in faith and I was used by God and I messed it all up. That God could never use me. And I'm here to tell you this morning that that is a lie from the pit of hell. God will use you if you will simply be willing to say yes. He will take the broken, weak, inadequate areas of your life, use you anyway so that He will get the glory. I love the old quote that you might be here this morning and be the best looking, the most cultured, the most intelligent, the most capable. Good news, friend, God can even use someone like you. But it's not His norm. This is the beauty of the Christian walk. That God, He uses us despite our inadequacies. He takes everything that the world says, this is success. This is what it takes to be impactful. This is how you meet needs. And Jesus says, watch this. You think I'm a fool? I will use that foolishness to shame your wisdom. That He can use anyone that will simply say, I don't know how the need's met, but this is everything that I have. Anyone. And that anyone is you. So you can believe that God could never use you. That's your decision. But just know you are believing a lie. Verse 10, we're almost done, but there's still one more thing that Jesus has to teach us. Jesus said, have the people sit down. There was plenty of grass in the place, and so they sat down. And Jesus, He took the loaves. And what does He do here? I love this. He gives thanks. So do you find yourself in a place in your life where you're under-resourced and you're facing insurmountable odds? Or you're overcome with a problem or a situation that you have no idea how God is going to show up and meet the need or lead you through it? The very first thing you need to do is give thanks for what you have. He gave thanks and He distributed to those who were seated. What's that next line? As much as they wanted. He did the same with the fish. And when they had all had enough to eat, meaning when they were all stuffed to the gills, He said to His disciples, gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted. The last thing Jesus shows us about the heart of God and how God works in the world is that He is lavish, but He is never wasteful. Notice how the story doesn't say that He was able to produce just enough to where everyone could have just a little to sustain them to get through, and then they could go back home. No. It said they ate to their heart's content, they ate to their fill, and they gathered the baskets of leftover so that nothing would be wasted. This is how God works. That God has no desire to just save you. He wants to give you a purpose in your life. That God has no desire just to cancel the debt of your sin. He wants to set you free from your sin. This is it. This is how He even works financially. That God doesn't want to give you just enough to meet your needs. He wants to give you more than that so you can then meet the needs of others. That's how the story earlier today was shared. only because people understand it. I'm gifted to give. God's given me my full, and above that, now I give it out. I'm blessed to be a blessing. And so the question that we're all left to wrestle with this morning is that God has been lavish in our lives, lavish with goodness, lavish with hope, lavish with grace, lavish with gifting and calling and purpose. But the question we have to answer is, will it be wasted? Will I hoard it to myself? Will I consume more than I need so that I have nothing left to give? Will I allow apathy to win so I simply sit on the sidelines and let others attend to me? Am I the benefactor who blesses others, or the beneficiary that just wants to be blessed because of everyone else's sacrifice? Will I say yes, or will I watch the opportunity to usher in the kingdom of God in this earth be passed from me, Philip, to Andrew? Would you pray with me? God, I pray that you would show us today, reveal to us what you're doing in our hearts. It's so easy to look at a story like this and to think, well, it's just merely a picture, a beautiful reminder that Jesus is Lord and that he has authority, and that, God, your provisions are great, but there's something happening below the surface. There's more brewing, that Jesus is attempting to teach us something about your will, about your nature, God. And I pray that you would help our hearts discern what it is you have for us today through this word. So I have just 3 quick questions for you. The first is simply this. Maybe you're here today and you are walking through a season of testing. And we have a lot of different words for testing that we use. That I'm under attack, I'm being persecuted. But Jesus he's providing us a new framework through which we understand testing. Could it be that it's not all this attack on you because God's angry or because you've done something wrong, but maybe he's attempting to teach you something through this season of testing? I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's hard, but could you through this be changed into the image of Christ? And what would be happen if you were just given the gift of a new perspective in how you perceive and understand the test that you're experiencing? Secondly, will you say yes? What is God asking you to do? And will you say yes? Will you be the Philip who's still loved, mind you, but it just didn't add up? The economics, the logistics, the wisdom just didn't add up. It wasn't possible, and you just couldn't get beyond that. Or will you be the Andrew who shows up with what he has? Little or big, small or large. For some of us, we're like, foolishness is about the only thing I have to bring to God. Well, good. He'll use even that. Stop putting the pressure on yourself to manufacture the result and just be faithful. Where's God calling you to be faithful? To show up, to open up your mouth, to trust him, to lean in, to forgive, to reconcile, to humble yourself, will you simply say yes? And lastly, I want to talk to the group of you who need to hear that God is lavish, and He's lavish with His grace. See, the thing is, the grace of God, it doesn't just meet our need for today. But the grace of God covers our sins of yesterday, today, and tomorrow. It's lavish. And for you, you need to be a recipient of this grace. That you've tried in your own power and might to earn God's love, to be a good person, and you just realized the hard way that it's just never enough. And this morning, you need to be a recipient of the lavish grace of God. If that's you, I want to invite you into a prayer as we close. You could simply say this prayer with me by simply saying, God, I want to receive your grace. I don't deserve it. I can't earn it. But yet amazingly, you give it to me. So I want to say yes in acknowledging that I need your help. I want to say yes in acknowledging that I am not enough, strong enough, good enough on my own. I will always fall short, but through grace I am. So I receive it today in Jesus' name. Thank you for the faith that you are giving me in this moment to believe that Jesus is in fact God's Son. Thank you today for helping me understand that my past doesn't have the power to determine my future. And that through grace, I can be washed white as snow, renewed, cleansed, and set free. I receive the grace of Jesus today. And help me today give my life to serving you. Father, we thank you that this is your heart. That you never give us just enough, but you give us more than enough. More than we could ever deserve. More than we even need. So we can give that to others. I pray that today this message would change us, Lord, that it would propel us to behave differently, think differently, act differently, God. And we give you all of the credit. The outcome's on you, so use it as you please. We love you. We thank you most for Jesus, and it's in his incredible, awesome, powerful name. Everyone said, amen. Anyone grateful for lavish grace today? Can we thank God for that?